I used to think deliveries were routine, same streets, same doors, the same polite nods as people grabbed their packages without even looking at me. Until him, the man in the towel. He always wore a towel whenever he opened the door, and my heart would race every time I saw his broad shoulders and sculpted muscles. And everything shifted the day he invited me inside. The first time I saw him, I didn't speak. That was probably for the best. Hi, my name's James, and I deliver packages for a company that prides itself on punctuality, efficiency, and discretion. Mostly, my days are a blur of cardboard boxes, elevator buttons, and polite "have a nice days." But then there's Henry. He lives in the penthouse of a high-rise that looks like it belongs in a magazine spread gleaming glass, minimalist furnishings, and the kind of view that makes you wonder why you ever thought your apartment was enough. I didn't notice the view the first time, though. I noticed him. Henry opened the door wearing nothing but a towel wrapped around his waist. Just a towel, and nothing else. He had dark, wet hair that clung to his forehead, broad shoulders that looked like they'd been carved out of marble, and a presence that made me forget the words polite and professional. My hands, which were usually steady while I scanned packages and rang doorbells, trembled slightly as I handed him his delivery. He didn't speak. I didn't speak. For a moment, the world shrank to the narrow doorway, the smell of his shampoo mixing with the faint aroma of expensive cologne and the weight of unspoken attraction. After a beat, he offered a nod. That was it. No, thank you, no, come in. Just a nod as if he'd acknowledged my existence and then returned to some invisible script in his head. I nodded back. Have a good day, I said, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet hallway. He murmured, barely audible. And then he closed the door. I walked back to the elevator, my pulse thundering in my ears, trying to remind myself I had seen nothing more scandalous than a man in a towel, which, okay, was technically true. But somehow, that single, fleeting glance had seared itself into my brain. The next deliveries were worse, or better, depending on how you looked at it. Because Henry, he always answered the door in the same way. A towel, a tilt of his head, and silence. Sometimes I wondered if he noticed me staring, or if he was so accustomed to delivery men staring that he had perfected his obliviousness. I learned the rhythm of his days. Packages would arrive in the morning, sometimes around 10, sometimes a little later. I'd approach the door with the same careful steps, trying not to trip over my own curiosity. And every time, I was met with the same quiet, tantalizing tableau. There were hints, though. A flash of a smile when I handed him a box slightly heavier than expected. The faint clink of a pendant around his neck catching the sunlight. Once, I caught the briefest look of amusement as I fumbled with the scanner. These tiny, fleeting interactions made my chest tighten, made me wonder what it would be like if he spoke, if he laughed, if he allowed me past that threshold into his world. I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea what he was doing either, and yet, something unspoken passed between us, a current that hummed through the air every time I left a package on his doorstep. Days turned into weeks. I fell into a rhythm. Wake, drive, deliver, nod at Henry, leave. And every time I saw him, I felt the same jolt, as if my body remembered something my mind refused to acknowledge. It was a Tuesday when things shifted. Nothing monumental had happened. I was just doing my usual route, my arms full of packages, my mind halfway to lunch, when I found myself standing in front of Henry's door. I rang the bell. He appeared, towel wrapped as always, hair still damp. But this time, instead of taking the package and retreating, he paused. "James," he said. His voice was low, smooth, with a hint of amusement. I blinked at him, frozen mid-step. You know my name?" I stammered, because of course he did. I had said it countless times on the scanner, but hearing it roll off his tongue directed at me felt like a minor revelation. "Yes," he said simply. Then, after a brief hesitation, "Could you come in for a moment?" My stomach did that ridiculous flip that it had done every time I saw him. I hesitated. This was against all protocol, and yet, I found myself stepping inside. His apartment was brighter than I expected, sun streaming in from floor-to-ceiling windows, the hardwood floors gleaming, the minimalist furniture somehow making him look even taller, more imposing. Sure," I said, feeling like a fool. What do you need?" He gestured toward the bathroom. "My bath sink, it's leaking. Could you take a look?" I nearly dropped the package in shock. I can try. I usually just deliver packages. I thought you might know a thing or two, he said, his lips quirking in that maddeningly subtle smile. If not, you can leave. I set the packages down carefully and followed him into the bathroom. The towel was now a little more precarious around his waist, though he seemed completely unconcerned. I pretended not to notice, my hands trembling slightly as I crouched to examine the small leak. It's just a loose pipe, I said, pointing to the dripping connection. You could tighten it with... I stopped, realizing he was staring at me, his gaze lingering just a fraction too long. I didn't think you'd come, he admitted. I wasn't sure what else to do, I muttered, fumbling with my toolkit. He leaned against the counter, towel slipping slightly with the motion, and I felt heat creep up my neck. My hands, trained to be precise and careful, shook as I worked. And yet, there was something thrilling about being here, in his private space, with the quiet tension humming between us. When the leak was fixed, he watched me with that same inscrutable expression. Thank you, James, he said. Simple, understated. But when he smiled, really smiled, not just the faint upturn of lips, it felt like a reward. No problem, I mumbled, wanting to say more, to ask more, to linger, but unsure if I was allowed. He nodded, towel now firmly in place, hair still damp. You can leave the rest of the packages in the hall, but thank you again. As I stepped back into the hallway, heart racing, I realized something. The dynamic had shifted. The door closed, and I was alone again, but the air felt charged, electric. Something had changed, though I didn't yet know what. And in that brief, fleeting interaction, I understood something essential. I didn't just want to deliver packages to Henry. I wanted to be noticed. I wanted to matter. I wanted more than just the nod of acknowledgement at a door. The day after I fixed the bath sink, I expected our interaction to return to the usual routine. You know, the silent exchange at the door, the towel, the nod, and nothing more. But Henry had other ideas. It was mid-morning when I arrived, the hum of the elevator barely masking the sound of my own anticipation. I carried the packages, trying to act like any other delivery man. My palms were sweaty, and for a moment I considered pretending to be in a rush just to avoid looking at him. But of course, I didn't. The door swung open before I could even knock properly. Henry was there, towel loosely wrapped around his waist, hair damp from what I assumed was a recent shower. But instead of the usual silent exchange, he smiled. A real smile, full, warm, inviting. James, he said, his voice low and measured. I need your help again. I blinked, heart thudding. Sure. What is it this time? He gestured toward the bathroom with a casual wave of his hand. The sink. I think something else is wrong. Could you come in? I swallowed, every instinct screaming caution, but curiosity and something else I didn't want to name won. Okay, I said. I followed him inside, careful to avoid looking at anything too personal. But the apartment had a way of making that impossible. The sunlight gleamed off polished surfaces, reflecting in the wide mirrors. And Henry just stood there, towel hanging loosely, bare chest glinting with the remnants of water droplets. I knelt by the sink, examining the pipes. The leak was minor, nothing I couldn't handle. Looks like it's just a loose fitting again, I explained, trying to focus on the work and not the heat rising in my chest. Henry leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching me. You're really good at this, he said casually, but the way his dark eyes studied me made the words feel loaded. I do this all the time, I muttered, though my voice was rougher than intended. Not like this, he said, stepping a little closer, the towel brushing my arm as he leaned to see better. Not in front of me. I froze. Heat pooled in my stomach, my fingers faltering on the wrench. The air seemed to thicken, charged with a tension I hadn't been able to name until now. You're nervous, he said softly. I looked up, caught in his gaze, and had no clever reply. How could I explain that seeing him like this, so casually naked, watching me work, made my chest pound and my thoughts stumble? Instead, I just nodded, fumbling with the pipe. Henry smiled again, slow and knowing. It's fine, he said. I don't mind. I wanted to believe him, but my brain was melting into mush. I finished tightening the fitting and stood up, brushing my hands on my jeans. "All set," I said, trying to sound confident. "Thanks," he murmured, and for a heartbeat, I thought he might reach out, touch my arm, let the moment linger. But he didn't. Not yet. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, though. It was expectant, as if we were both waiting for the other to speak first. Finally, Henry cleared his throat. "James, would you like to stay for a minute? You helped me, and I'd like to offer a drink. Water, wine, something." My heart skipped a beat. I hesitated, scanning the minimalist kitchen. I usually don't. "Just for a moment," he said, his smile encouraging, almost vulnerable. "It's not complicated. I just like talking to you." I froze, caught off guard by the honesty in his voice. Talking with him, here, in his apartment, alone. My pulse hammered in my ears, and then I nodded. "Okay," I said, surprising myself. Henry moved to the fridge, pulling out a bottle of sparkling water. He poured 2 glasses, handing one to me with a smile that made my knees weak. "To fixing sinks?" he joked. "To fixing sinks?" I echoed, clinking my glass against his. We sipped in silence for a moment, the kind of silence that felt heavier than words. I wanted to talk. I wanted to ask about him, his life, why he lived like this, why he always wore a towel, why he made my heart feel like it was being remade every time I saw him. Instead, I settled for small, careful observations. The way his dark hair curled slightly at the ends, the way his towel seemed too thin to shield the broad expanse of his chest, the faint scent of soap and something else, something warm and intimate. "So," he said, leaning on the counter, arms crossed, "you're not like other delivery guys, are you?" I blinked. "What do you mean?" He tilted his head, studying me. "Most. They don't notice things, or they don't seem to care. You notice. You watch. You linger, even when I don't speak." I choked back a laugh, feeling my cheeks heat. I just pay attention," I said, knowing how lame it sounded. He smiled, slow and teasing. "I like that," he said. "Really?" And then he moved slightly closer, towel brushing against my arm as he leaned to place his glass on the counter. I could feel the heat radiating off him, feel the tension spike between us like a live wire. "James," he murmured. His voice was low, intimate, and it made my stomach twist. "Do you ever think about more?" I swallowed hard, heart pounding, unsure if I was imagining the meaning behind the words. "More?" I asked, voice rough. He didn't answer with words. Instead, he leaned just slightly closer, his gaze locking onto mine, searching, testing, and in that fraction of a second, everything shifted. I wanted him. I wanted to reach out, touch him, see if he'd let me. I wanted to hear his voice say my name again, to feel the heat of his body against mine. But we didn't. Not yet. We stayed like that for a moment longer, 2 glasses in our hands, 2 hearts hammering, 2 bodies aware of the invisible line we hadn't crossed but could feel beneath our skin. Then he laughed softly, breaking the tension. "I should put some clothes on," he said, tugging the towel a little tighter around his waist. "Wouldn't want my modesty to scare you off." I laughed too, though it was shaky, breathless. "Yeah, modesty is important," I said, feeling a strange relief mixed with disappointment. He smiled, that smile that made my chest ache. "I'll see you tomorrow, James," he said, stepping back toward the door. I nodded, trying to calm the sudden storm of desire and curiosity in my chest. "Yeah, see you tomorrow." As the door closed behind him, I leaned against the wall, letting out a long breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Something had changed, something dangerous, thrilling, and intoxicating, and I didn't know if I was ready for it. But I wanted it. The next few days fell into a familiar rhythm. Packages, nods, brief glimpses of his towel-wrapped form. But there was a difference now. A subtle shift in the air whenever I arrived at Henry's door. Something unspoken, electric, that hummed just beneath the surface. Then came Friday. I was finishing my last delivery of the day, glancing at my watch, 5:00 p.m. Early evening light was streaming across the city, painting long shadows on the pavement. I had one package left Henry's and a strange flutter of anticipation in my chest. I rang the bell, trying to act casual, though my palms were slick with sweat. The door swung open. Henry was there, towel-wrapped as always, but with something different in his eyes. A warmth, a spark, an invitation. "James," he said, voice low and smooth. "I just got back from Paris." "Paris?" I echoed, eyebrows raised. "For work?" He shook his head, towel slipping slightly as he moved. "For pleasure," he said, smirking, and I brought something back. "Would you like to try it?" I blinked, caught off guard. Try it?" He gestured toward the kitchen. "Wine, from Paris. I thought we could share it." Something in me wanted to say no. I wanted to run back to my van, pretend nothing was happening. But the curiosity, the attraction, the thrill of being alone with him in his apartment, it won. "Sure," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He led me inside, moving with a fluid grace, towel brushing against his thigh. I tried not to notice. Really, I did. The apartment smelled faintly of his cologne mixed with the lingering scent of the shower. He opened a bottle of red wine, the label delicate and French, and poured 2 glasses. Handing me one, he said, "To chance encounters and unexpected company." I raised my glass, echoing, "To chance encounters and unexpected company." The words felt weighty, though I wasn't sure why. We sipped in silence, the kind of silence that's both comfortable and electric. Every glance, every movement felt loaded. I wanted to say something, to break the tension, but no words came. Instead, I just watched him the way his fingers curled around the glass, the faint glimmer of water droplets on his collarbone, the way his eyes seemed to hold secrets I wasn't meant to know. "James," he said, voice low, "do you ever think about us?" I nearly choked on my wine. "Us?" I asked, though my chest was suddenly tight, my pulse hammering. He leaned slightly closer, towel brushing against my arm. "I mean, you, me, like more than just this." His gaze held mine, steady, searching. I didn't answer. What could I say? That I'd been thinking about him every day? That the sight of him in that towel, the way he smiled without speaking, had made my heart ache in ways I couldn't name? He smiled, a faint, knowing curve of his lips. And then, before I could process it, he leaned closer. The distance between us shrank, the world narrowing to the space where our bodies almost touched. My breath hitched. Heat pooled in my stomach. I wanted to reach out, to close the gap, to feel his skin against mine. And then it happened. Our lips met. Tentative at first, a gentle brush, testing, exploring. I froze for a heartbeat, unsure if this was real, unsure if he'd pull back. But he didn't. He pressed slightly closer, his lips soft, warm, intoxicating. I felt a jolt, a current that ran through me, and all the restraint I'd been holding melted away. I pressed back, matching his pace, letting the tension we'd been building over weeks finally release. It was brief, a taste, a promise, but it left me breathless, shaking, and desperate for more. When we finally pulled back, Henry's eyes searched mine, dark and intense. "James," he whispered, "I've wanted that for a while." I swallowed hard, chest heaving. Me too," I admitted, voice rough. For a long moment, we just stood there, glasses in hand, towels and wine forgotten, letting the air between us thrum with new energy. Then he laughed softly, a sound that made my chest ache. "We should sit, drink the wine, talk." I nodded, still catching my breath, and we moved to the sofa. The wine bottle sat on the table, half empty, but it didn't matter. Conversation flowed awkwardly at first, small talk, laughs, gentle teasing. But beneath it all was a new layer, something intimate and fragile, a bond forming in the quiet glow of his apartment. I realized, with a mix of fear and exhilaration, that things had changed. Forever. When I left that evening, the sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the city in shades of gold and purple. I walked to my van, heart pounding, replaying the kiss over and over. Henry's lips, soft and warm, the brush of his towel against my arm, the spark in his eyes, it was all there, seared into my memory. And I knew with a certainty I couldn't deny that this was just the beginning. The week after our wine and kiss evening, things had changed subtly but irrevocably. There was a new tension between us, something charged in the air whenever I approached Henry's door. I wasn't sure if it was desire, anticipation, or something deeper, but I couldn't deny it. It was a Wednesday afternoon when I made my usual delivery. The sun was warm, the city bustling, and I had no idea that today would be different. I rang the doorbell. A familiar chime, a pause, and then the sound of movement inside. The door opened, and my heart nearly stopped. Henry was there, but not alone. A woman stood beside him, elegantly dressed, hair perfectly styled, an air of sophistication that contrasted sharply with the casual intimacy of his towel. She smiled at me politely. "Hello," she said, her voice sweet but formal. Henry's towel was wrapped tightly around his waist, but his expression was unreadable, controlled. There was none of the warmth I had become used to seeing, none of the teasing spark. "James," he said, voice neutral. "I didn't expect you so early." I blinked, unsure how to respond. Just delivering your package as usual," I said, holding it out. He took it without a word, and for a brief second, I noticed the tension in his hands, the way his shoulders stiffened. The woman beside him glanced at me with polite curiosity. Not suspicion, but enough awareness that I felt like an intruder. "Would you like to come in?" Henry asked, and something in his tone froze me. This wasn't an invitation. It was different. Guarded, I shook my head, stepping back. "No, I should just leave it here," I said, heart pounding. He nodded, his gaze flicking between me and the woman. I didn't know what to make of it. I didn't know what he expected me to do or what I was supposed to feel. "Thank you, James," he said finally, taking the package. His eyes lingered on mine for a moment, but the warmth, the intimacy, the spark that had drawn me to him was gone, replaced by something cold, polite, distant. I nodded awkwardly. "You're welcome," I muttered, my hands clammy. As I turned to leave, the woman smiled again, perfectly composed, unaware, or perhaps aware. I couldn't tell of the complicated tension in the room. Henry closed the door, leaving me in the hallway, my chest tight, my mind racing. I leaned against the wall, taking a deep breath. The image of him with someone else, someone who wasn't me, burned in my mind. Questions swirled. Who was she? His wife? A friend? Was I nothing more than a fleeting distraction to him? The elevator arrived, and I stepped inside, heart pounding, hands still shaking. The city outside moved on as if nothing had happened, oblivious to the storm in my chest. I kept replaying the scene over and over. The towel, the package, his controlled expression, the woman's polite smile. Everything was the same, and yet everything had changed. By the time I returned to my van, I realized I couldn't even remember what the package was. All I could remember was him. By the time I returned to my van, I realized I couldn't even remember what the package was. All I could remember was him, his eyes, his lips, that moment we had shared over wine, the first kiss, the warmth that had left me aching for more. And now, nothing. I drove through the city streets, hands gripping the steering wheel, mind spinning. The ambiguity of the situation gnawed at me. Was Henry seeing someone else all along? Was our connection just a temporary thrill, or had something changed in him that I couldn't see? I wanted to confront him, demand answers, insist that he explain. But another part of me, the part that had been cautious, careful, professional, knew that any action on my part could shatter whatever fragile connection we still had. The next few days were torturous. Every delivery, every glance, every knock at his door became a test of patience and restraint. I wanted to run up the stairs, throw myself into his arms, demand to know the truth. But I didn't. I delivered packages as usual, nodding at him through the doorway, silent, careful, professional. And yet, I couldn't stop thinking about that day, the way he had looked at me, the tension in his shoulders, the woman's polite, oblivious smile. It was a puzzle I couldn't solve. Finally, one evening, I found myself parked outside his building, staring at the penthouse windows, trying to make sense of what I had seen. The city lights glittered, indifferent to my confusion. And there, behind the glass, I thought I saw him looking back. Eyes dark, unreadable, conflicted. I didn't know what he was thinking. I didn't know if he wanted me, if he had ever wanted me, if the wine, the kiss, the stolen moments we shared meant anything at all. All I knew was that I wanted him. And that wanting him now came with a complication I couldn't untangle. I leaned back in my seat, hands on the steering wheel, mind spinning with possibilities, regrets, and questions that had no answers. The city buzzed around me, alive and indifferent, and I realized something. The story wasn't over. Not yet. But what came next? I didn't know. Would he reach for me again? Confess the truth of what he wanted? Or had that chapter closed before it even fully began? I didn't have the answers. I couldn't see what lay behind the closed door. And maybe that was the point. Sometimes, the most unforgettable stories are the ones left unfinished. Sometimes, the longing, the tension, the uncertainty is the most intoxicating part of all. And as I drove away, the last glimmer of light fading over the horizon, I couldn't help but wonder, would I ever truly know Henry? Or would he remain a beautiful, unattainable mystery, wrapped in a towel, in a penthouse, in the folds of my memory, forever? So, thanks for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe and consider making a donation to our channel if you enjoyed this slow burn romance love story. See you soon!